Welcome back. So we covered the psychodynamic approach, okay, unconscious influences on the personality. And now we're going to begin with the trait approach. And think about this. If it wasn't for the trait approach, we would not have a way today of measuring people on particular traits, okay? On the same dimension for each trait. So from a low score to a high score, seeing where different individuals place relative to each other, right? And how those differences in where they place actually predict behavior. So this is a really fascinating approach, and I think you're really going to enjoy this lecture today as we see where it came from, what were the precursors, what led to it, their journey, and all the way up to some contemporary research that has come from this approach. Okay, so this journey actually started with scientists looking for personality types. So coming up with these early typology kind of theories. Okay. And we're going to touch on a couple of the most well-known ones here, with the first one being way back in 400 BC. And this was called humorism. Humorism. Okay. So the idea here was that perhaps different personality types were determined by differences in levels in the body humors. In other words, the body fluids. Okay, so, and after the methodological revolution, it became clear that there's no research supporting this theory. So you don't need to learn all of these specifics that are on this graph. That's just there so you can see how they fleshed it out. Okay, but I do want you to know the very basics. So it's called humorism, and it's based on the balances of different body fluids. And the four basic body fluids being blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Okay, so let me just give you one example. Again, you don't need to know these specifics, but they had a lot of specific predictions, like ones you can see in this chart, such as too much yellow bile would mean that somebody was more melancholy in their personality. Okay. Now, another early typology, this was in the 1700s that morphology came out. So morphology is based around the body type, as you can see on the slide. So now, it's good ideas, right? They're all starting from scratch here. But, again, it did not pan out with research later on when scientists had the resources to study this more rigorously. However, I want you to know just the basics of this theory of morphology. So the idea here was that your personality was related to your body type, your basic body type. You see the three basic body types here. Oftentimes, body types are still referred to in these terms. Okay, and in case you weren't already familiar with them, you can get them down in your notes. The ectomorph is the thin one, the mesomorph is the more muscular one in the middle, and then the endomorph on the far right. Okay. Let me just give you a couple of examples. Again, you don't need to know the specific predictions of these theories that did not pan out, but just give you an idea. They believed that people who had an ectomorphic body type were more sensitive, and people with a more endomorphic body type were more lazy. Again, no research confirming this at all. However, very interesting to see how some of these very early theories can live on in the public, have a lasting impression that lazy, overweight stereotype, still existing, unfortunately, today. Then something happened in the 1800s that really refocused scientists on this quest for types of personality, helped to refocus them to above the neck, you might say. Okay. And that is, you might have heard the story of Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was an American railroad worker. He was a supervisor, in fact. He was very well liked by his coworkers, by his superiors, and soft-spoken but still firm when he needed to be as a supervisor. Good sense of humor, and very known for being wise and making wise decisions and treating people with compassion. Well, he miraculously survived this horrific accident. Okay, and you'll see from this picture that an iron rod, okay, was driven completely through his head and caused a lot of damage. Let me show you here on the slide. It caused a lot of damage, in particular in his left frontal lobe. Unbelievable that this guy survived. Okay? But it really drew people's attention to something, because how would they know? It changed his personality significantly. In fact, company could not even hire him back. He, as I said, he was soft-spoken before. You might know that, there's one of the functions of the frontal lobe is impulse control. Okay? And he became very belligerent, very quick to lose his temper, where he didn't tend to swear and cuss before. He did so very frequently afterwards. Just this incredible change in his personality, which again tended to focus scientists now more above the head, right? Now this next typology, early typology, okay, is one focusing again from the neck up. And I found this picture of a sculpture at a museum, and thought this would help you to remember phrenology. Okay, so phrenology was kind of, you might think of it as the study of bumps on your head. You say bumps on your head. Well, everybody's skeleton of your scalp, if you feel it, you will feel that there's different areas of your scalps that protrude more or are more encaved. Okay, and the theory here, a fellow named Franz Gauss, and you don't need to memorize that, but Franz came up with this theory that were parts that, well, he kind of mapped out the brain, okay, with different parts, the surface of the brain, with different parts of the personality, according to his theory. So, and he thought, if you had a bump at a certain part, so it was more raised, that would mean you have more of that trait. And if it was concave, you had less of that trait. Franz Gauss came up with this theory. And then if you are ever in Minneapolis, okay, something really interesting to look up is called the Museum of Questionable Devices. Questionable because we know better today, right? No research whatsoever against supporting phrenology theory. So Franz Gauss' theory was based on his own personal experience with people, and you're going to see, elaborated it significantly, mapping out this whole brain. And even some others even came up with a device for measuring the skull in these different places. Okay? And that's what you can see here at this Museum of Questionable Devices. And here's a picture of that device, believe it or not. Okay. Minneapolis, the Museum of Questionable Devices. Okay. So we know now that this whole theory is more, you might say today, quackery, right? But quackery still cells. And this is a picture, this was in a magazine, it's a picture of Britney Spears having her phrenology read on a street mall, okay, for a price. Okay. But this brings us from the early typologies to our modern trait approach with its modern trait dimensions. So when we say dimensions, we're talking about a continuum, right? It can be from 0 to 100, or it can be from 0 to, or 1 to 50. That's pretty arbitrary. The important thing is that everybody's measured on the same continuum, right? So you can see how their placement differs, where they differ relative to each other. Okay, so modern trait dimensions. Now, the trait approach, sometimes students think this is just going to focus on the type of traits we talked about earlier on. We mentioned the fact there were more than 4,000 of them in the English language, things like shy, cruel, trustworthy, so on and so forth, right? And with the trait approach, the term trait is used as more of an umbrella term. Okay. What I mean is it encompasses more than how you usually think of the term trait. It certainly encompasses personality traits, okay? But in addition to that, it encompasses many other parts of your ways of being. Okay, so remember that the definition of personality was, durable and pervasive way of being. Okay, and so it includes many parts of your ways of being besides traits. So it covers traits, but, and get these down, remember these, it also encompasses needs, so people differ on their needs, and preferences. Okay, you have different preferences than others, and also different styles. So we really have some interesting research to look at in the course of this lecture. Okay. Now, all of these traits, needs, preferences, styles, okay, etc., all of these are normally distributed. Okay. And what we mean by normally distributed is it's going to be what shape of a curve? A lot of you know the answer to this, right? It's a bell curve, bell-shaped curve, okay? Which means that people vary on them, but they vary around a mean. So most people are somewhere around the average point. However, hey, whether we're talking about a personality trait or we're talking about a different kind of trait in this definition, like a need, we also have fewer people, but still some that are extremely low, and same thing with extremely high in that trait. So people vary all along it. It's just that, most of them are grouped in this more center part. So normally distributed. And this is where we're going to go with the first, we might say, half of the lecture today. That'll be based on theory, the other half on research. So the theory part of it, we are going to cover Gordon Allport and his theory. We're going to cover Henry Murray and his theory. We're going to look at Cattell and what the kind of contribution he made. Remember the Big Five. We're going to cover the Big Five. That's the most famous component of the entire trait approach, the most famous theory. And we're coming from the Big Five. But you might notice on this slide that we do not have one particular researcher associated with the Big Five. There were many. And then finally, we're going to end the theory part today to talk about Mischel's criticism. So Walter Mischel ended up writing a scathing criticism of the trait approach early on, when it was kind of there was a tendency for it to be misused. Okay? And it really, at the time, kind of paralyzed this area of study, the trait approach to studying personality for a bit. But then, after researchers kind of collected themselves and brushed off all the dirt and got back up, right? It became much stronger, the field, the approach as a whole, because he offered very constructive criticism. And you might know that, criticism is never helpful by itself, right? But when we offer constructive criticism, that means we're also offering ideas, for how these problems can be resolved. And Michelle did that.